Okay, welcome back. Hour number 3. Regis Tremblay joins us this hour. He is a filmmaker, producer, has a new, and you'd see the trailer. In fact, you can see the whole movie. It's 1 hour and 38. 1 hour and 38 minutes. It's all up there. It's called 30 Seconds to Midnight, The Final Wake-Up Call. Now, you all have seen The Clock of Doom, and it's getting very close to midnight. This film is called, again, 30 Seconds to Midnight. 1 hour and 38 minutes. You can watch it anytime you'd like. I urge you to do so. It's unique. I was able to watch the first part of it. Let me play a little bit of that, then we'll say, and Fred, let's say hello to Regis first. Hello, Regis. Welcome to the program.
Hey, good evening, Jeff. Thank you, and very happy to be with you.
Well, I'm glad to have you along. If you would permit me, I'd like to play just a little bit from the opening of the film to give people an idea.
Go for it.
I want to see this whole thing. It's that powerful. Here we go.
And when the earth shook, it started a war. In the air and it washes ashore.
The missile will come in, or the bombs, at 20 times the speed of sound. You won't even hear them. They'll explode here with 6 times the heat inside the center of the sun.
This is Dr. Helen Caldecott.
And this is ground zero. It will dig a hole 3/4 of a mile wide and 800 feet deep, turning us, the buildings, and the earth below to radioactive fallout shut up in the mushroom cloud. 5 miles in all directions, everyone's vaporized. 20 miles from here in all directions, everyone will be lethally burnt, lying in what remains of the buildings and what remains of the streets. People will be sucked out of buildings by winds of 500 miles an hour, turning into missiles traveling at 100 miles an hour. Windows popcorn, shards of glass decapitating people. And then the whole area will be engulfed in a huge firestorm of 3,000 square miles. Even in winter in Boston, everything will burn. And as these fires burn, huge amounts of black radioactive smoke are shot up into the stratosphere all over the country, and the fires will coalesce right across America, east to west, north to south, and the whole country will burn. And as these cities burn all over the world, there'll be millions of corpses. But you can imagine what devastation it would be. We are close to that. We are like lemmings walking blindly towards a cliff of nuclear annihilation, worrying about things that don't matter.
I hope that got through to you. She's not exaggerating. Dr. Caldecott, been on this program over the years and certainly one of the foremost people of our time in trying to alert us about the power of the atom, which we foolishly and stupidly and suicidally started playing around with in the late 1940s and 50s in earnest. There was something called Atoms for Peace in the 50s, promising us endless free electricity and power and all that. And look at the horror we have done to this planet. 30 Seconds to Midnight, the film available for you to watch right now. Regis Tremblay, the man who made the film, is with us. What gave you the idea to do this?
Well, Jeff, I made another documentary, a historical documentary in 2012 called The Ghosts of Jeju. And Jeju, Jeju, is a small island off the south coast of South Korea.
Uh-huh.
And they've constructed a massive naval base to accommodate America's pivot to Asia. And it displaced a 500-year-old farming and fishing village of 1,800 people against their will. And I had the opportunity to go there to make this film. And it was during that trip that I realized the enormity of the United States military presence in South Korea and Japan. And this film was very successful. It was translated into 7 languages all over the world, including Chinese and Russian.
Huh.
And when I finished that film, I knew what the next film was going to be. I was going to continue to document the effects of the United States military presence on the people, the culture, and the environment around the world. And
that's in over 150 countries.
It's like some 800 bases in over 100 countries. Mm-hmm. Many of them are just what they call lily pads, especially in Africa. There might be just a team of special forces people of 10 or 12 people. But anyway, I realized the enormity of it, and of course I was paying attention to everything that was happening geopolitically in the world, and I became very concerned about the use of nuclear power. Fukushima happened, and your previous guest was talking about the Ronald Reagan that actually was radiated by the fallout from Fukushima. And so when I started making this new film, I went back down through the Pacific from Hawaii. I went to Kyoto, Japan. I went to Okinawa. I went to Hiroshima for the 70th anniversary of the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima. And then I went down to the Marshall Islands, where between 1946 and 1958, the United States tested 67 atomic weapons in the Marshall Islands. And I saw for myself and with my own eyes what it had done to the people and to the environment, and I was really angry and horrified. And of course, with the United States rattling the sabers and building bases on Russia's border and encircling China as well, I really got very concerned and fearful that a nuclear war, a nuclear Armageddon, could really take place because these countries are all nuclear-armed countries.
Now, let me ask you a question, Regis.
Right.
This is important. To have a thermonuclear war between the U.S. and Russia, or the U.S. and China, or both, somebody has to think that that's a winnable proposition. How do you win a thermonuclear exchange, a world war with nukes? You don't. Nobody wins.
I agree completely with you. And, you know, I traveled to Russia last year in October. I was there for a month, and I met with a whole variety of people. I met with journalists. I met with a former colonel in both the Soviet and the Russian Air Force. Mm-hmm. And his comments in the film really state the reality of a nuclear war. He said it's human insanity. It's not winnable. Nobody wins, nobody loses. But, you know, there was one general, and I don't know if it was General Curtis LeMay, who was the commander of the United States Army Air Force that dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but he allegedly, or one of his generals said, in a nuclear war, if there's one of us less standing, we win. And in my mind, that is complete human insanity. There's nobody that's going to win. And Dr. Helen Caldicott was wonderful when I interviewed her 2 years ago, just outside of Boston. She afforded a tremendous amount of time for myself and a small film crew. And I was just really profoundly affected by what I learned from Dr. Caldicott and what she says in the film. And so basically, to get back to the theme of the film, it's there are only three issues that are existential threats to life on the planet. There's only three. Mm-hmm. Nothing else matters, as she brought out in the film. And they are a nuclear Armageddon, nuclear power, and the most recent Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in Japan has spewed radiation throughout the Pacific and into the atmosphere. The same thing happened at 3 Mile Island in Chernobyl. And the shelf life of this radioactivity is like 10,000 years. There's no way to store it safely. And the most recent scare was the scare at Hanford laboratory in Washington State. And the third threat, the existential threat to life on the planet, is climate change. And I was very involved in the Climate March and 350.org, where I live up in the state of Maine. And I realized that the powers of the world, the industrial nations, didn't have what it takes, the urgency and the resolve to do something significant to mitigate global warming, the effects of climate change. And so those are the three elements that are in the film. But what is so unique about this film, I think, is that as a student of American history, and my undergraduate degree was in American history, I never learned about the real history, the untold history of this country. And so what I did is I went back to 1492, the 15th century, when the white European colonialists came here and landed and began a genocide of the Native American populations in North America and South America.
60 million people here in North America.
Yeah, I mean, it was horrific. And this continued for a couple hundred years. They stole the land and the resources. And then when it became the United States of America, this government continued the same genocide of the Native American populations from east to west. And then they had nowhere else to go. There was the Pacific Ocean, and the philosophy, the underlying principle was manifest destiny. God has given us this, and we can go anywhere in the world to claim for our own the lands of other people and their resources. And the entire history of this country has been, since 1798 at least, there have been over 500 military interventions on every continent around the world. And just since World War II, the United States military has killed somewhere around 22 million people around the world. People who were resisting colonialism, were seeking independence from colonial rule. And we see the same thing happening today on a much larger scale and in real time, what's happening in the Middle East. You know, it started with Afghanistan, and then it went to Iraq, then it went to Libya. Now it's in Syria. They're still seeking regime change in Syria. Iran appears to be the next target. Iran is an ally of Russia. And so I became really concerned about the trajectory of manifest destiny. This country, which has brought the entire world now to the brink of nuclear annihilation, or if Mother Nature has the last laugh, it will be less merciful than a nuclear Armageddon. So it's a really horrifying film. I think a lot of American people are not willing to accept what has happened in this country and the true history of this country.
No, they've been lied to and conditioned to reject anything that isn't comfortably and normally ensconced into their little brains in school. It's sad. Right.
So, you know, as an independent filmmaker, and I'm 72 years old, and not able to get any industry money or industry support. The film festivals around the country won't accept the work that I do. They turned down Ghost of Jeju, and they said it just wasn't a good fit for our audience.
It's too true.
and so what I had to do was get in touch with, and this was for the Ghost of Jeju, I got in touch with groups all around the country that were either anti-war or avowedly peace groups, anti-nuclear, you know, Catholic worker groups, WILF, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and Quakers, and Veterans for Peace here in America. And I started contacting them around the country, and I made 3 cross-country tours, screened it over 100 times, and the only way that I can do this on Social Security is to offer the film for a donation of $20. And everywhere I go, nearly everybody that sees the film wants a copy, and there's never any royalties or fees for sharing that film in your living room or at a library, in a theater, wherever you can get it shown.
What an ingenious way to do it, Regis. I commend you. That is what an achievement. Bravo. Well done.
Well, I have a little side story on that, but so anyway, it went around the world, and it's still going. People are still getting copies of this film. And so when I finished this film, 30 Seconds to Midnight, at the very beginning of this year, I immediately started contacting people that knew me. Mm-hmm. And I just finished a 10-city tour in April, and I'm in Austin, Texas tonight, and tomorrow night I'll be in Dallas, and I'll go on another 10-city tour that'll take me through Texas, Los Angeles area, Las Cruces, New Mexico, over to Arizona, and then up to Oregon, and then Seattle, and back home.
What is your MO? And you rent a theater, you get a screen, and you advance it?
I wish there's been a couple of groups that have managed to rent theaters, and they've managed to pull in, good-sized crowds. And when I say good-sized crowds for a film like this, it might be 100 people.
I understand, yeah.
But most of the time, Jeff, I've screened it in a meeting hall. I've screened it in a small library room, medium-sized library room, which a group, can get for $30 an hour or something like that.
Yes.
And there was one time I went up to Taos, New Mexico, and 3 people showed up, and the projector didn't work. And we ended up watching the film on my little MacBook Pro 13-inch screen. Yet the 2 people that were there were pretty significant, and both of them had large networks, throughout the United States and beyond.
Yes, yes.
And so, even with 2 people, it ended up being, a really big splash, because they shared it with literally hundreds or thousands of people. So that's how I've been doing it, and wherever I travel, people are always happy to host me, and they put me up. And
where are you going in? Where are you going in Oregon?
Ashland. I was in Ashland on the first tour, and I'm going back again somewhere around the 17th or 19th of June. Until the 22nd, and then I'll fly up to Seattle and do a screening there, which I think is when you get, I can get over to Ashland easily. I would like to come and shake your hand, and I'll watch the movie in the meantime. But Ashland's a great venue. Where are you located?
I'm in the area. I'm right there.
I'm going to be in Topanga City, Los Angeles area, Long Beach.
No, I'm in the Ashland area.
Oh, you're up in the Ashland area?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'll have to shoot you off a message and let you know the dates that I'm there.
Give me the information, and I'll certainly announce it on the air. We have listeners here. David John Oates is coming to Ashland this Saturday to put on a reverse speech presentation, and a documentary film crew is coming along. They're making a film of reverse speech, and that's going to be fun this Saturday night at the Ashland Library at 7:30, which is a great venue, and you might want to try for that.
Yeah, and I'm actually, after having spent a few days there, it's a very progressive community, and the activist community there is quite strong. I'm actually seriously considering of relocating from Maine to Ashland, Oregon. I was that impressed.
You couldn't do worse. You couldn't do better. That is the target that this area of Southern Oregon is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I vacationed there with the family years ago, up and down the Oregon coast, and we had relatives up in Washington, and every summer we would go. My kids grew up loving the Oregon coast. We camped all along the way.
Oh, yeah, all the cliches.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it,
Yeah, seriously, but you could not do any better. Any cliche you want to apply to it, you can twist around and make work. But it is There are no nuclear targets. It's upwind from all nuclear power plants. There's nothing near at all. That's why I came up to Southern Oregon. I was in Santa Barbara. Gorgeous.
Oh.
But now we have to worry about Fukushima, which unfortunately covers the entire 48 contiguous states and Canada. All of North America is covered with Fukushima. You don't get away from it. You can do things that can chelate the radionuclides out of your body, and that's the bio-superfood product I have created at Chernobyl by scientists, and it works. A second banner on the top of the homepage. But by all means, Regis, let me know when you're coming up here, and I'll give you some advance promotion, and I'd like to say hello. I'll come over, and that'd be great.
No, that would be, yeah. I know that you do a lot of issues, pertaining to nuclear, and you have been for a while.
Yeah.
One of the things that Helen Caldicott says in the film, among many, is that the effects from nuclear power are more long-term than short-term. Mm-hmm. And they do result, as you mentioned with the previous person on the show, the effects of radiation, and not only from Fukushima, but there's something like 45 of the 60-something commercial nuclear power plants in the United States.
That 103 reactors, they all leak. Don't even quantify. They all leak.
So what Helen said was that the effects of nuclear radiation are cumulative.
Yes, sir.
And
absolutely.
And the body can store them from anywhere between a few years and 70 years before the cells start to multiply by the trillions. And she says that's a cancer. And she said if we can't kill a disease, then the dictum is that we have to prevent it. And she says we have a nuclear industry that cannot be contained. It is not safe, and this is going to be for the rest of time. Her comments about nuclear waste and storing it, for example, in places like Hanford and wherever else they store it, she says we have to think in geological time frames, ice ages, tornadoes, earthquakes, all kinds of catastrophic things that'll change the face of the earth and release this radiation. So she says it will be with us till the end of time.
Yeah, and our time, and God knows how much. We have to take a break here. Hold on, Regis. She's 100% correct. And I would urge all of you again to remember what Regis just said and what I've been saying for over 6 years now. The product created by Dr. Michael Kuryak, the Russian scientist in Ukraine after Chernobyl, works. It's called bio-superfood. It's the world's most 4 potent algae put together, grown underground in the Kamchatka Peninsula, and it chelates heavy metals, it chelates radionuclides, it builds your immune system. It saved hundreds of thousands of lives after Chernobyl, and it's available here. It's the only thing on the planet that has been proven to work. So there. Hold on a minute. Regis and I will continue right after this. 30 seconds to midnight. 30 seconds to midnight. And the clock is ticking. How fast, I couldn't tell you. I can tell you, Regis may or may not know this, but we've been covering here on the program for you for over 6 years the Fukushima catastrophe from the day it happened. And every week therein, until recently when we backed off a little bit more because we are really facing something that we've run into the mainstream media wall. We don't want to repeat ourselves, so we'll pull back just a little bit here. And as the data continues to compile and become more obvious, we will continue to bring it to you. I will remind you again, you must protect yourself. Bio-superfood, it's not a joke, it works. Please, for yourself, your family, get some. That's all I'm going to say. 30 seconds to midnight. The nuclear genie should never have been allowed out of the bottle. Splitting the atom was the worst thing imaginable on this planet, probably a fatal move I'm not sure that we can reverse it. No place to put nuclear waste, no way to deal with it. Maybe someday, if we live long enough, we can learn how to somehow rearrange it into a non-lethal form. I don't know what the technology or the science is. It's possible down the road, but right now we are in trouble. Hanford could actually, if it were to really go, could cause as much calamity and havoc here as Fukushima already does. This would be based on the mainland, though. It's already leaking into the Columbia River, which flows all the way into the Pacific Ocean, so you know that. It's a very tragic and horrible situation. Nuclear could well be the end of humanity as we know it. 30 seconds to midnight. The film is available for you right now. It's an hour and 38 minutes long. Please watch it. You just click on the link right below Regis Tremblay's name and guests, and spend some time, when you have time, and watch this film. Here's just a little clip, another clip, to give you an idea of some of the information that is covered in the film.
For example, there are almost 200 bases still in Germany, more than 2 decades after the end of the Cold War.
American bases.
There are more than 120 bases in Japan, nearly 100 in South Korea, 50 in Italy, and tens of bases in countries like Britain, Turkey, and countries from Asia to Europe, Central America, and beyond. One of the justifications for this huge collection of bases for decades has been that U.S. bases overseas spread democracy. And while this might have had some validity in the early days of the post-World War II era in Germany, Italy, Japan, today we find U.S. bases in more than 30 countries that are led by undemocratic, often dictatorial regimes. So we have our bases de facto supporting and helping to prop up, in some cases, undemocratic regimes and helping to block the progress of pro-democracy movements. Despite the end of the Cold War, the United States has continued to maintain hundreds of bases in East Asia surrounding China, as well as hundreds of bases still in Western and increasingly in Central and Eastern Europe surrounding Russia.
I'll stop it right there. It's all in the documentary, the whole scenario that we're facing, the madness, the suicidal mania that is propelling these military monstrosities. You don't surround Russia and China with American nuclear weapons and get away with it indefinitely. It's not going to happen. Go ahead, Regis, tell us more.
Well, on this whole nuclear issue, since 1945, when the United States dropped the 2 bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there have been over 2,000 nuclear tests by 9 countries. And they've been in the Pacific, they've been in China, mainland China, they've been in the far regions of Russia. The British did their tests in Australia, the French in French Polynesia, and God knows how many tests were conducted in Nevada.
Right.
All atmospheric tests, all of them. So this radiation was just sucked up into the stratosphere and spread all over the world, and it's been
still there.
Spread for those last 75 years.
Yep.
So it's real, and of course you mentioned that the media is just not telling us anything about these threats to life on the planet. And it was David Vine, by the way, a professor from American University, who wrote the book Base Nation, that I interviewed, and talks about all the bases all around the world. Helen Caldicott, at the very end of the film, and I had a hard time deciding to put it in there, but I figured, you know what, we're running out of time. I was even thinking of changing the title of the film from 30 seconds to The Final Countdown, 10, 9, 8, etc. But Helen said, I wonder if we are an evolutionary aberration designed in an evolutionary sense not to survive. And that is profoundly frightening.
Let me say one thing about that. I've thought about this very thing for decades, and I think she's probably absolutely correct. because I do believe that two-legged hominid, intelligent, sentient species have arisen on this planet over its 4.5 billion year history, over and over again, only to destroy itself each and every time. Now, is that manifest destiny, as you're suggesting in her remark that you relayed to us? Is that what we're programmed to do? Could be. And I think, in fact, it may be. Go ahead.
Well, Jeff, with what's playing out before our eyes this very day in the Middle East, and number 45 is over there right now. We met with the Saudis, the largest arms sale in history, going to the Saudis and forming a Middle East NATO. And then he's over in Israel, and, you know, been giving Israel billions of dollars every year and turning a blind eye to what is happening in Palestine and what's happening right now in Syria. Now, when I was in Russia, I was asking everybody I talked to, this was in October, if they were afraid that the conflict in Syria, because the Russian Air Force was there, if that could result in a direct conflict, direct war with the United States, and do you think that that could evolve into a nuclear Armageddon? Most people said no, they didn't think it was going to happen. The retired Russian Air Force colonel said it was a very dangerous situation, more dangerous than we'd been in during the Cold War. And he said, even though he said that a nuclear war is human insanity, there's no survivors, he felt that it was possible. That even an accident, and as Helen says in the film, an accident, we've come so close many times that it could happen tonight without any warning, and it would be all over for everybody in the world. And so when I was in Russia, I met people, and they're just like us. They love their families, they love their children. They want nothing but peace and relative prosperity for themselves and their countrymen. And I made a short film. I call it Je suis Russia. It's only 38 minutes long. And I did it because I wanted to dispel, I wanted to make it a counter-narrative to the lies and misrepresentations of Russia and President Putin. This film hasn't quite got the publicity and the attention that 30 Seconds to Midnight has, but it's been seen many, many times, and people have shared it. And actually, people are more interested in the story that I told in Je suis Russia than they are in 30 Seconds to Midnight, because that film is really earth-shaking for most American people. But they're curious about the Russian people. They're curious about President Putin. And I think that, whoever they are, and those people have names, and you know who they are too, I think. Sure. The ones that are beating the war drums have to have that enemy, and that enemy is now Russia and China. And the goal is to hopefully frighten Russia and China, bring them to their knees at the altar of American capitalism and imperialism.
Ain't gonna happen.
And I'm right with you right there. I do. Russia and China believe that they're strong enough economically and militarily that they are not going to bow down. And what I say at the end of the film, will the neocons, and that's who I refer them to in Washington, and their global elite masters, recognizing they have lost this epic battle for the future of humanity, take the whole world down with them in a nuclear Armageddon.
I will say this, and agree with you 100%, and just simply tag it with what I've said for years. These people, faced and confronted with the possibility that they would lose their control and their power over the planet, such as it is, would, in fact, take the whole game down with them, rather than lose it.
And that's where we are. I talk about this epic battle. None of these other skirmishes and wars or whatever matter, but right now, because of China and the new Silk Road, the one bridge, one road, and working with Russia to develop that enormous landmass that's referred to as Eurasia. Mm-hmm. And China is well on its way to developing high-speed rail right across that territory. And as this development of Eurasia continues, that becomes the center of the world in every sense. Its economy, its military, its culture, its development.
Right.
And this is the greatest threat to the United States imperialism.
We see what we're doing here, Regis. This is important to add on to what you're saying because it amplifies it. We are not building our infrastructure. We're not building our way of life, our society, our economy like they are. Look what China is doing. You just said that mass rapid transit, high-speed rail all across the nation. They're building these enormous ghost cities waiting for people, millions and millions of people, tens of millions. They have cities waiting for them. What are we doing here? What are we doing here?
Yeah, good point. And the thing that people have to realize, that New Silk Road, or One Bridge, One Road, stretches from the Far East in China all the way through Russia and down through the Middle East, over to Europe, and all the way to Portugal and Africa. It basically will be the new center of the world if people were around long enough. Yeah. But you know, Jeff, there's a problem with this concept of development as well. We all in this country believe that progress and development has to happen. I mean, we just cannot live without it. And China and Russia are bent on the same, a part of the same thing. Development. It's not sustainable. We live on a finite planet. And I think development is the fourth threat to life on the planet. If we can't find out how to live together in harmony with all the people in the world and the earth and our environment, we're finished. And
when is the last time you've seen a program explaining to the American people what the average Russian citizen, male or female, feels about their country, their way of life, their people, about the United States? We're not allowed access to those kinds of things. We're kept isolated and walled off and compartmentalized by design. We're not allowed to really know those people, when getting to know them would be the most valuable thing we could probably do. And I'm talking through media, through documentaries, through films. We have no idea what they think like. We just think of them as Russians, faceless, mindless, soulless beings that walk around. Same thing with the Chinese. It's sad. The number of opponents we have, Russia, China, North Korea, Ukraine, Afghanistan, Syria, Eastern Europe, the war on the Eastern Front, once again, it's madness, sheer madness. There's no end of targets that can be put on the front burner and made to boil over and cause at least a limited war. If we attack North Korea, which I believe is probably going to happen, unless something comes along to change it, it'll be a nuclear attack, nuclear bunker busters, because the North Koreans have been building underground for over 40 years. They're way underground, just like the Iranians are. Same kind of thing. So we've got real problems here, and this film addresses it. 30 Seconds to Midnight. Go ahead.
Well, I'd like to pick up on your Russian theme. I spent the month of October in Russia, between Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Crimea. And I went there, and it was the very last part of the film that I had to figure out how I was going to use it. And I had to find out for myself what Russia and the Russian people were like. The group of people who hosted me in Moscow for 10 days were all members of the Russian Communist Party, a real minority and non-factor in Russian politics anymore.
Right.
And I didn't know they were communists. I had a friend who connected me with them, and it was incredible. They believe in God. They're not atheists. These people are not bent on an ideology to conquer the world like during the Soviet era. What they are all about is the remnants of socialism, where everybody was taken care of, everybody had a job, everybody literally went to school, went on to higher education, all free. They had free medical care. And these are the things that have disappeared in Russia now, because Russia now is basically, they have their own form of capitalism. If you go to Russia, you look around and it is capitalism on steroids. I mean, they have stores and boutiques, very high-end things. You look at the cars that they're driving, expensive late-model cars.
We don't know anything about this over here. You're totally right.
Yeah.
The Americans know nothing about that.
Right. And so I met them, and I thought, geez, communists, they're going to be atheists. They're going to want to conquer the world. There's people, no. That's not what we're about. And then I went over to St. Petersburg, and it's an incredibly beautiful city. I learned about the siege of Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg, and I visited a cemetery where there were 500,000 people in a mass grave, and there are 4 of those in St. Petersburg. And it was there that I learned that it was the Russians who defeated the Nazi German army, and not NATO and not the United States of America and the Western Front. 27 million Russians died in the siege, the Nazi siege of Russia. They came right up to Moscow. Right. And Stalin is credited with having turned the tide and defeated the German army. Well, then I went to Crimea, because that's another thing that's in the news. The paper, the media in Washington keep saying that Russia and Putin invaded and annexed Crimea. And that is so far from the truth.
Ludicrous.
It's unbelievable.
Ludicrous.
Yeah. Crimea has been part of Russia forever. I mean, before Catherine the Great in the 18th century. And it was Nikita Khrushchev in 1951 to secure his power in the Kremlin, and Khrushchev was Ukraine. He gifted Crimea to Ukraine, which was part of the Soviet Union. So it wasn't like giving it away to Italy or France or Portugal.
Right.
It was a political gift. And Crimea had been neglected this entire time. And so the fall of the Soviet Union happened. Crimea is still an independent province, but under Kiev, and has been neglected. And when the coup happened in Kiev, these people in Crimea were worried that the same thing was going to happen to them, that these right-wing neo-Nazis were going to come to Crimea and force their way of life on them.
Well, that happened with $5 billion American behind this whole movement. That's included in 30 Seconds to Midnight as well. That bit about Ukraine, because I went to the Ukraine in May. But anyway, the real truth of the matter is these people changed their government, their constitution, peacefully, legally, and then they orchestrated a referendum with no influence from Russia, Putin, whatever. The lies about 20,000 troops from Russia invading Crimea are the deal with Khrushchev when he gave Crimea to Ukraine was that Sevastopol, which is Russia's only warm water port in the world, is in Crimea. The deal was they could keep 20,000 troops there, and that would be the base of the Russian Navy. And so there was no invasion. Those troops had been there forever. And so the results of the referendum were, in Sevastopol, 97% of the people voted to return to Russia, and throughout the rest of the country, the total was 94% voted to return to Russia. The day after the referendum, and the people were ecstatic, they sent an appeal to the Kremlin, to Putin and the Russian Duma, asking to be reunited with Russia, and Putin signed the papers, and there it was. That's right.
And so this is the exact opposite of what the mainstream Western media has had us believing about that evil Russia and that demon Vladimirovich Putin.
Yeah.
So anyway, Yeah, and you know, when people see the bit about Russia that I have in the film, and there's a really good bit about Ukraine and Russia, and some people take offense that they said you're looking at Russia and Putin through rose-colored glasses. He's awful. He's massacred journalists and political opponents, and he's got people locked up in jails.
Right.
Of course,
we don't do that, do we?
No, we don't.
I mean,
I would encourage people to also watch the little film Je suis Russia, which is on my YouTube channel.
Very good. Look up 30 Seconds to Midnight. Just do a search on YouTube and you'll find it. Most important film to watch. It'll give you the whole current profile of what we're facing. And it's not a good picture. Better to know than not to know. At least that's our motto here. Regis, thank you very much for being here, and continue good luck, and I hope to see you at some point, perhaps up in the Ashland area.
Terrific. It's been great being on your show, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Regis. You be well. Take care.
Good night.
Good night. Okay, and off and roaring on a Monday. We'll be back tomorrow night to carry on. Hope to have the pleasure of your company tomorrow night as well. Take care, and we'll talk soon.